in the royal necropolis of Deir el-Bahari, where kings and queens were meant to sleep undisturbed for eternity, something went wrong. Among the carefully wrapped bodies of ancient pharaohs, one corpse stood out. He was not resting. He was screaming. His mouth frozen wide open, twisted as if in agony. Head tilted back. Skin, leathery, shrunk tight over bone. A death that looked more like punishment than peace. He had no royal sarcophagus, no inscriptions of prayer, only a crude wrapping of goat skin, something the ancient Egyptians saw as ritually unclean. To his contemporaries, it would have been worse than exile, worse than execution. It was erasure. But this man was once a prince, born into power, wrapped in privilege, and yet, in death, he was denied even the right to be remembered. Why? What could drive a royal son to be buried like a criminal? And who, or what, was he screaming at? He left behind no statue, no temple, no song etched in the lips of priests. But he had once walked beneath ceilings painted with stars, had tasted honeyed wine, and had been called Son of the Sun. Pentawere. A prince born not to rule, but to orbit power like a lesser moon. His name was spoken quietly and forgotten quickly, but history remembers in fragments, and the most jagged ones cut the deepest. He was the child of Pharaoh Ramesses III, king of a realm so vast that the Nile itself bowed to his will. But in a palace where bloodlines twisted like river reeds, Pentawere's place was precarious. His mother, Tai, held no royal title carved in stone. She ruled only through whisper and glance, and in that world where thrones were won in silence, a single favor could shift a dynasty. The walls of the palace were smooth and sunlit, but they echoed with the rustle of ambition. Brothers passed each other with perfect smiles. Mothers offered fruit and watched with hawk eyes, and beneath the perfume of lilies and frankincense, something sour fermented. Pentawere lived not in shadow, but in its penumbra, close enough to power to feel its warmth, too distant to claim its light. And in that half place, resentment took root. Slow, quiet, inevitable. It wasn't just envy. It wasn't rage. It was something colder, a decision. The conspiracy woven in silk. It didn't begin with a knife. It began with a whisper. In the innermost quarters of the palace, where the walls were draped in linen and the air hung heavy with sweet myrrh, something ancient stirred. Not a rebellion, not yet. Just a thought, a question, shared in candlelight between mother and son. A flicker of what if beneath the eyes of servants trained not to hear. Pentawere's mother, Tiye, was no fool. She had watched dynasties rise and crack from within. She understood the rhythm of power, how it shifted not with armies, but with alliances. The pharaoh may have held the crook and flail, but in his aging years his grip had loosened, and the court, always hungry, had begun to circle. There was another prince, legitimate, favored, firstborn of the great wife. He would inherit the double crown, the temples, the people, the sun itself. Pentawere, by blood, would inherit nothing, unless that line could be severed. But pharaohs were not just kings. They were gods made flesh. To raise a hand against one was to shatter the balance of Ma'at, the divine order. It was heresy. It was madness. And yet, inside the velvet folds of Tiye's chamber, logic gave way to legacy. The plan took shape not as a shout, but a murmur, soft as silk, sharp as fate, Courtiers were chosen, eunuchs persuaded, guards replaced. The rot began to bloom. Outside, Egypt thrived. Grain in the granaries, boats on the Nile, priests in procession. But inside the palace walls, a murder was unfolding, veiled in gold. The night of knives and silence. It came without thunder, without war drums, without even a raised voice. Just a shift in the air, so slight it might have passed unnoticed. A hallway candle flickering too soon. A footfall out of rhythm. A single falcon, startled from the rooftop and lost in the dark. The night Ramesses III was meant to die began like any other in the royal house. The king was weary, perhaps. Age had pressed lines into his brow. The weight of empire is a heavy crown, even for a god. But in the shadows beyond his chamber, something moved. Not soldiers, not assassins cloaked in iron. Just men, palace men, trusted men. The kind who carried his meals and bowed too low. The kind who knew when the guards changed shifts, when the priest turned to pray, when a lock was half secured. What happened next is still debated. Some say the blade reached his throat. Some say poison kissed his wine. Others whisper of a struggle, short, brutal, muffled by linen and stone. What the ancients wrote was vague, as if Egypt itself could not bear to speak it plainly. But the body tells its truth. In 2012, more than 3,000 years after the deed, CT scans revealed a deep cut across the king's neck. Measured, fatal, hidden beneath the wrappings of ceremony. It was not age that claimed him, it was betrayal. And somewhere, perhaps not far from where the blood soaked into royal linens, a son stood still, heart pounding like war drums that never sounded. He had done it. He had killed a god. But gods do not die quietly. In the Hall of Truth. Egypt did not scream. Not at first. The death of a pharaoh, even one murdered, was wrapped in ritual and silence. His body was prepared with oils and prayers, his name spoken carefully, so the soul might pass into the afterlife. But beneath the hymns and incense, the court trembled. Because pharaohs do not die by the hands of servants, they die by treason. And treason demands truth. What followed was not a trial in the way we understand it. It was a reckoning. Recorded on a papyrus, known today as the Judicial Papyrus of Turin, a list of names emerged: nobles, wives, guards, scribes. Over 30 conspirators stood accused. Some denied. Some confessed. Some vanished before the ink dried. And among them, Pentawere. His name was not written directly. The scribes called him the other son. But history remembers the weight behind that phrase. A prince, a murderer, a betrayer of blood. He stood in the hall of Ma'at, where justice was not just law, but divine balance, the feather and the heart, truth and consequence. No jury, no appeal. Only the voice of the court and the echo of eternity. Some conspirators were burned alive, others mutilated, exiled, erased from monuments. But for a son of the king, the punishment would be different, swift, intimate, ritualized. He was given a choice, to die by his own hand. A death without honor. They called it the noble death, though there was little nobility in it. No procession, no chant of the living, just a quiet chamber, a vessel of poison, and a name that would be stricken from every wall. Pentawere knew what awaited him if he refused. The stake, the fire, a death that stripped the soul of passage. But suicide, though shameful, offered a thin thread of dignity. It would not cleanse his name, but it might grant his spirit a chance to pass. Somewhere. We do not know what he drank, Some say he chose hemlock. Others whisper of snake venom ground into wine. Perhaps it was a powdered resin used in palace rituals, twisted now into something final. Whatever it was, the effect was cruel. His body convulsed, his breath fractured, and when it ended, it did not end in peace. The embalmers found him later, mouth agape, back arched, face twisted not in sleep, but in terror. This was no royal death. There were no canopic jars to guard his lungs, no golden amulets pressed to his heart. Instead, they wrapped him in goatskin, a material shunned in Egyptian funerary rites, seen as impure. No inscription marked his coffin, no spell from the Book of the Dead to guide his soul. He was bound, silenced, buried in haste. And yet, the scream remained. Across centuries and sandstorms, through war and excavation, his mouth still gaped open, locked in that final moment. A portrait of agony so raw, it pierced the veil of time. Not just a death, a curse remembered. The Voice Returned by Science. For over 3,000 years he lay in silence. Tucked among the royal dead, yet denied their peace, his twisted features became little more than a curiosity, a grotesque relic behind museum glass. Visitors called him the Screaming Mummy, as if his torment were a spectacle, as if his pain had no name. But silence, even when sealed in linen and time, can still echo. In 2012, a team of researchers reopened the case, not with amulets and incantations, but with CT scans and forensic DNA. They compared his remains to those of Ramesses III, whose body, miraculously preserved, had lain only meters away in the same cache. And in the cold precision of numbers, something ancient stirred. The mitochondrial DNA told a story older than dynasties. A match, father and son. The bloodline was undeniable. The other son had a name. And the knife that ended Ramesses' life had, most likely, his fingerprints on it. But science offered more than identity. It revealed the final moments. The scream wasn't metaphor. It was muscle locked in spasm, the throat frozen mid-convulsion. A reaction to poison, or perhaps strangulation. A death without ritual, and therefore without release. And suddenly the image changed. He was no longer just a face in a museum, gaping for effect. He was a prince. A son who murdered a god. A man who died knowing he would be forgotten and screamed not out of pain, but out of erasure. The curse of memory. In ancient Egypt, death was not the end. It was a threshold, a passage shaped by ritual, remembrance, and the careful balance of Ma'at, the order of the universe. To be buried without a name, without prayer, without purpose, was the worst fate imaginable. Worse than execution. Worse than oblivion. It was unbeing. That was the punishment Pentawere received. A prince by birth, but in death, a warning. His body twisted not by chance, but by design. His scream not silenced, but displayed. He was denied the afterlife, but not forgotten. Never truly forgotten, because memory, like sand, refuses to settle. What the priests tried to erase, the bones remembered. What the scribes dared not write, the DNA whispered back. And so the curse he received, that he would be unspoken, was broken not by forgiveness, but by curiosity. Cold, scientific, relentless curiosity. And perhaps that is the irony. Pentawere, who conspired to change history, failed in his lifetime. His father's name endured. His plot collapsed. His own identity was stripped away. And yet now, 3,000 years later, it is his face, not Ramesses, that haunts us. It is his open mouth we cannot forget, his hollow eyes we cannot ignore. His final moment, frozen in linen and agony, returned from silence not by priests, but by strangers, with scanners and screens, who gave him back his name, not out of reverence, but fascination. And in doing so, they granted him the one thing Egypt had tried to steal: a legacy. Some stories fade quietly into dust. Others are buried on purpose, sealed behind stone in silence. But once in a while, a voice breaks through, not with words, but with a scream. Pentaware's story was never meant to survive, but history has a strange way of remembering the things we try hardest to forget. If you listen this far, thank you. Not for watching, but for witnessing, for staying curious, for letting the forgotten be heard once more. Because some legacies are carved in gold, and others in pain.